At 13,000 feet above sea level, the air is so thin your lungs have to fight for every breath. The landscape is barren. Nothing grows. The wind howls across the jagged rocks of the Andes, carrying a cold that sinks deep into your bones. It is one of the most inhospitable places on planet Earth. Yet, in the late 16th century, a city arose here that was larger, richer, and far more extravagant than London, Paris, or Rome. Its streets were paved with cobblestones imported across oceans. Its churches were draped in pure gold. Its merchants wore the finest silks from China and pearls from the Caribbean. The city was called Potosí, and it was built at the base of a single towering peak known as Cerro Rico, the rich hill. The Spanish didn't build this city because they liked the view. They built it because Cerro Rico wasn't just a mountain. It was, quite literally, a mountain made of silver. In 1545, a local indigenous man named Diego Hualpa was searching for a lost llama on the freezing slopes of Cerro Rico. As night fell, he built a small fire to keep from freezing to death. As the flames heated the earth beneath him, something impossible happened. The rocks began to melt. A shining ribbon of liquid metal began to ooze from the dirt. Diego Hualpa had stumbled upon the largest, purest deposit of silver ever discovered in human history. Word reached the Spanish conquistadors almost instantly. They had just finished tearing through the Inca Empire, stripping its temples of gold. But the gold of the Incas was a mere appetizer. Cerro Rico was the main course. Within a year, the barren plateau was swarming with prospectors. Within a decade, it was a booming metropolis. But there was a problem. Extracting the silver required smashing solid rock, carrying it up thousands of feet of precarious ladders, and processing it in freezing temperatures. The Spanish elite had no intention of doing this backbreaking work themselves. They needed a labor force, a massive one. And to get it, they would engineer one of the most brutal systems of human exploitation the world had ever seen. In the 1570s, the Spanish Viceroy of Peru, Francisco de Toledo, arrived in Potosí. He saw the incredible wealth flowing from the mountain, but he wanted more. He wanted industrial efficiency. To achieve it, Toledo resurrected an ancient Incan labor draft called the Mita. Under the Incas, the Mita was a form of public service. Citizens built roads or farmed for the empire for a few weeks a year, and in return, the empire fed and protected them. Toledo twisted this system into a death sentence. He mandated that 1/7 of all adult indigenous males from hundreds of miles around had to travel to Potosí and work in the mines for an entire year. Every year, tens of thousands of men were marched from their homes, leaving their families behind to face starvation. When they arrived at the rich hill, they were thrust into a literal hell. The miners worked in shifts that lasted for up to a week at a time. They would descend hundreds of feet into the pitch-black mountain using precarious rope ladders. Once inside, they remained there. They ate, slept, and worked in darkness, choking on toxic dust. Because the air at 13,000 feet already lacks oxygen, the conditions deep inside the poorly ventilated shafts were suffocating. The temperature inside the mountain was sweltering, but when the men finally climbed out of the shafts carrying 100-pound sacks of ore on their backs, they were hit by the freezing, sub-zero winds of the Andes. The sudden shock of temperature killed hundreds through pneumonia alone. But the falling rocks, the exhaustion, and the freezing cold weren't even the deadliest part of the job. The real killer came after the silver was out of the mountain. To separate the pure silver from the useless rock, the Spanish introduced the patio process. This required crushing the ore into a fine powder and mixing it with mercury. The indigenous workers, entirely unprotected, waded bare-legged through massive vats of toxic mercury slurry, mixing it with their feet. The toxic fumes of the mercury destroyed their nervous systems. Their teeth fell out. They suffered violent, uncontrollable tremors. Many were driven entirely insane before dying in agonizing pain. The Spanish priests who visited Potosí were horrified. One wrote in 1594, "If 20 healthy Indians enter the mine on Monday, half may emerge crippled on Saturday." The indigenous people of the Andes had a different name for Cerro Rico. They didn't call it the Rich Hill. They called it the mountain that eats men. While modern historians debate the exact death toll, estimates range from hundreds of thousands to over 8 million indigenous and enslaved African workers who perished inside the mountain over 3 centuries. And every single life lost was turned into a small silver coin. If you want to know why this unimaginable suffering was permitted, you only have to look at what that silver bought. The sheer volume of silver pouring out of Potosí is difficult to comprehend. At its peak, this single mountain produced over 60% of all the silver mined in the entire world. The Spanish crown took a mandatory 20% cut of all the silver mined, a tax known as the Quinto Real, or the Royal Fifth. This endless river of silver traveled down the Andes on the backs of llamas, onto galleons waiting in the ports of Lima, up to Panama, across the Caribbean, and finally across the Atlantic to Spain. This silver transformed Spain into the undisputed superpower of the globe. It funded the massive Spanish Armada. It paid the salaries of invincible Spanish mercenary armies fighting endless wars across Europe. It built the spectacular palaces of Madrid. But it didn't stop there. The silver of Potosí gave birth to the very concept of globalization. The Spanish minted the silver into the peso de ocho, the legendary piece of 8. Because the weight and purity of these coins were completely standardized, they became the world's first universal currency. For the first time in human history, a merchant in London, a pirate in the Caribbean, and a silk trader in China were all using the exact same money. In fact, the silver of Potosí was the only currency the Ming dynasty in China would accept in exchange for their highly coveted silk, tea, and porcelain. Cerro Rico was the beating heart of a new global economy, pumping silver through the veins of the world. It seemed as though Spain had discovered the ultimate cheat code for infinite wealth. They didn't need to produce anything. They didn't need to manufacture goods. They just dug money straight out of the ground. But the laws of economics are as ruthless as the mountains of the Andes, and Spain was about to learn a terrifying lesson. What happens when you have all the money in the world? You go bankrupt. It sounds like a paradox, but it is exactly what happened to the Spanish Empire. Spain believed that national wealth was determined solely by how much precious metal a country held in its vaults. So they hoarded the silver of Potosí. But as billions of pieces of 8 flooded into the Spanish economy, something unprecedented happened. The value of silver began to plummet. Today, we call it inflation. In the 16th century, they had never seen anything like it. It became known as the price revolution. Because the Spanish had so much free cash, they stopped investing in their own domestic industries. Why bother building a textile mill or improving agriculture when you could just buy finished goods from France, England, or the Netherlands using Potosí silver? Spain outsourced its entire economy. Their domestic manufacturing collapsed. The silver flowed into Spain, but it didn't stay there. It immediately flowed out to rival nations who were actually producing goods. Spain became a conduit, a middleman passing the wealth of the Americas directly into the pockets of its European enemies. To make matters worse, the Spanish kings became arrogant, believing their wealth was literally infinite. King Philip II and his successors took out massive loans from foreign bankers to fund their endless holy wars, using future silver shipments from Potosí as collateral. But wars are expensive, and soon, the Spanish crown was spending money faster than the indigenous slaves in the Andes could mine it. When a Caribbean hurricane or an English pirate fleet inevitably intercepted a Spanish treasure convoy, the crown couldn't pay its debts. Despite controlling the richest mountain on planet Earth, the Spanish Empire officially declared bankruptcy. Not once, not twice, but 9 times between 1557 and 1662. The silver of Cerro Rico had enriched the world, but it had hollowed Spain out from the inside. The empire rotted under the weight of its own stolen wealth. Empires rise and fall. The Spanish galleons eventually rotted at the bottom of the sea. The global superpower of the 16th century slowly faded into a secondary European state, but the mountain remained. Today, if you travel to the high altiplano of Bolivia, Potosí is still there. It is no longer one of the richest cities on Earth, In fact, it is located in one of the poorest regions of South America. The gold-leaf churches are fading, and the cobblestone streets are worn. But the most chilling part of the story isn't that the Spanish left. The most chilling part is that the mining never stopped. Over 400 years after Diego Hualpa lit his fire on the slopes of Cerro Rico, men still march into the dark. Today, independent cooperative miners work the mountain. There are no Spanish overlords whipping them, but the desperation of poverty is just as harsh a master. They still descend into the suffocating darkness, armed with cheap dynamite and chisels, chasing the last remaining veins of silver and tin. And the mountain is still eating them. The centuries of relentless, explosive extraction have turned Cerro Rico into a hollow shell. It looks like Swiss cheese on the inside. The structural integrity of the peak is failing, and sinkholes regularly swallow miners whole. The life expectancy of a modern Potosí miner is tragically short, largely due to silicosis, the same deadly lung disease that plagued their ancestors centuries ago. To protect themselves, the modern miners don't pray to God when they enter the shafts. They pray to El Tío, the uncle. Deep inside the mountain, the miners build shrines to a demonic figure. He represents the lord of the underworld. Before a shift begins, they offer him cigarettes, pure alcohol, and coca leaves, begging him to grant them safety, to let them return to the sunlight just one more time. They understand something the Spanish Empire never did. You don't own the mountain owns you. The story of Cerro Rico is the dark foundation of the modern world. The coins that funded revolutions, the wealth that built international trade, the origin of globalized capitalism. It can all be traced back to a single peak in the Andes, and the millions of unnamed men who bled in the dark to drag it into the light. It is a monument to human greed, standing 13,000 feet tall. Thank you for watching. If you want to uncover more of the forgotten history that shaped our world, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.